Thank you very much, and welcome to the White House for this very important convening. And I'm looking for my reading glasses, which I know are here somewhere. You've got yours on. Yeah, good. I want to thank you all for coming and to say hello to all of those who are watching by satellite transmission and the many others who will see this on a delayed satellite later in the day. This is the first ever White House convening on Hispanic children and youth. Over the past 6.5 years, the President and I have often brought experts to this room where history has been made time and time again. We have looked at some of the greatest challenges facing our children today. We've looked at school violence. We've looked at child care and early childhood education and development. We've looked at Social Security and Medicare. The President has held many important announcements here. But I truly believe that there are few issues that are more important, if any, than the one we will be discussing today. How will our children live in the next century, and how will we ensure that all of America's children share in the prosperity and the opportunities that await in the future? We know that when we ring in the millennium in a few short years, there will be 15 million Hispanic young people living in our country. These children are the next generation of parents and mentors, healthcare professionals, educators, entertainers, senators, all kinds of jobs in the country. And our future depends upon them and how we now treat, nurture, and help their development. And that is why this discussion is so important. I started talking about this with members of the Hispanic Caucus and others in the White House and around the country some time ago. And I especially want to thank Lucille because she is the real driving force behind what we are doing today. Congresswoman Roybal Allard is an expert on child development and a champion for children all over America. And we are so delighted that she has been joined here today with members of the Hispanic Caucus who are so devoted to this issue. I'd like to ask all of the members of Congress who are here to please stand. I also want to thank all the members of the administration who are here. I saw coming in Aida Alvarez, who is the Director of the Small Business Administration. Maybe you could stand, Aida. Mickey Ibarra, who is the Director of the Office of Intergovernmental Relations here in the White House. And none of this would be possible without the President's right-hand woman and mine as well when it comes to legislative affairs, Janet Murguia. But there's also someone who I want to acknowledge very specially today because she's been a friend of mine for more than 15 years. We were just laughing in the Blue Room. Who would have thought that when Maria Echeveste and I became friends, she was a lawyer, I was a lawyer, and we served together on a board and had a lot in common, but no one could have ever predicted that I would end up here, nor that she would come with us and become the Deputy Chief of Staff. And she proves every day that this administration is devoted to enhancing the lives and futures of all Americans. Maria grew up in California, the child of farm workers, and is now, what can I say, the extraordinary Deputy Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, and I would like to ask her to stand as well. We also have George Munoz, the President and CEO of OPIC. I think George is here, right? Nelba Chavez, the Administrator of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Pat Montoya, the Commissioner of Children, Youth, and Families. And two Assistant Secretaries of Education, Norma Cantu and Maria Moreno. I've introduced them because they are going to be on the front lines of helping us to implement whatever suggestions and ideas come out of this convening. And we are very blessed to have a good roadmap of what we should be discussing and how we should be helping our young people. And that is because of the excellent work of the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans. This commission consists of some of the finest educators in the country. They've reached out to teachers, parents, and communities to help our country improve the way we think about and educate young Latinos. They've done so under the leadership of an exemplary chair, Cha Guzman, who brought to this position the passion and vision of a former bilingual education teacher, and a vice chair, Guillermo Linares, who is here, the first Dominican-American elected to a city council. Now, I know, Guillermo, that you're also, in addition to that prestigious job, finishing a doctoral degree in education, so this is a really nice convergence. I'd like to ask all the commission members who are here this morning to please stand. Now, because of our satellite technology, we're being joined by people in Massachusetts, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Indianapolis, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and for the early birds in California who are with us. But I'm sorry that we had to change the time. The President and I have a funeral this afternoon, and we had to start earlier in order to be able to attend the funeral, where a dear friend of ours will be eulogized by the President and the Vice President. But we have arranged for California to receive this tape at a decent hour later in the day. Now, there have been so many events that my mind races back and over in thinking about how we are all here today and what we hope to accomplish. I have seen the incredible work of communities throughout our country as they have tackled the problems that confront our young people, and particularly our young Hispanic citizens. I will never forget touring Puente Learning Center in East LA back in 1996. It had been built on an abandoned lot from the dreams of a community that wanted the best for their children. And all around the area, you could still see the graffiti and the broken windows, but the center had never been a victim of any vandalism. When I went inside, I met adults learning English, earning high school diplomas, receiving job training. I saw 4- and 5-year-old children, many from bilingual homes, learning to read, write, and use computers. And I heard stories, incredible stories that I've heard repeated around the country. One story, like Miguel Flores, whose life had been totally turned around. When he had first been found by Puente, he was a young man with lots of potential, but was hanging out with the wrong crowd. So he'd been brought in for the evening program for high school students in their tutoring and mentoring. A UCLA law professor tutored and mentored him. And when he got to Yale University, Puente helped him find a way to pay for it. He's now graduated from Yale. He hopes to get a law degree, and he is here with us today. And I'd like to ask him to stand as a representative of all those young people. We could have filled not only this room, but the entire White House grounds, spilling out all the way to the Capitol with similar stories. Because we know that in communities across America right now, there are innovative, dedicated people working in preschool programs, in schools, and after-school programs, in all kinds of settings to reach our children. And that is exactly what we want to highlight today. because we've tried over the last 6.5 years to do what we could in Washington to make a difference in families and children's lives. But we know that there has to be a partnership with families and communities and schools and healthcare facilities and all the various institutions that make up our country. It has, of course, made a difference, what we've done here, but we need always to be reminded in Washington that we can only do so much here, and then we have to turn to people around the country. Now, there are many these days who promise to fight for children, for schools, and for communities, but I believe that we should follow my mother's advice to me as a child, and that is watch what they do, not what they say. Because there are many people who have a lot of rhetoric that is not matched by action or commitment. And think of what we together have done. Well, it has made a difference to working families that we raised the minimum wage and expanded the earned income tax credit and lifted millions of families out of poverty. It's made a difference that we've seen an expansion in Head Start and college loans and increased access to child care, after-school program, and we are looking for ways to provide health insurance to millions of families. There probably isn't anything more important to the future that we're talking about today than education. And it has made a difference that we have never given up on our commitment to bilingual education or our belief that every child deserves smaller classes, higher standards, and safer, more modern schools that are not falling down around their ears. Because we know that we have to focus our resources on education if we expect our children to flourish. And it was the Commission, the Hispanic Caucus, the Education Department, and the White House that came together to create the Hispanic Education Action Plan to improve the quality of education for Latino students. We should all be pleased that the administration won about $500 million in 1999 to help Hispanic youth master the basics of English, reading, and math, and to ensure that they stay in school, prepare for college, and graduate. And for the year 2000, the President has proposed over $650 million to build on these education programs. But the trick is getting what the President proposed through the Congress. With the deficit gone and unemployment at record lows, we face a fundamental choice about whether to move forward or backwards. Do we retreat into our own little worlds and say, well, I'm fine, my family's fine, my business is fine, I don't have to worry about anyone else? Or do we take advantage of this historic opportunity and confront the tough challenges that we still face in our society? This is not the time to approve a big tax cut and forget about our obligations to all of our children. As we look toward the day when Hispanics will be our largest minority and Hispanic children will fill more seats in America's classrooms, we cannot afford a tax cut that will dramatically cut education funding at every level, including programs in the President's Hispanic education agenda. We know we've got to continue to press forward, and that means we have to get more Hispanic children into Head Start. We've got to get them to graduate from high school and college. We know that there are still too many Latino teens getting pregnant, and we know there are still too many of our children and youth without health insurance. Far too many are born into poverty and never have a fighting chance at the future that all children deserve. These are not somebody else's children. These are all of our children, and we should begin to act on that. My real dilemma as I was getting ready for today was trying to figure out how to eliminate the many, many examples that I would personally like to talk about that we will get to talk about when we get into the program, and we've got the brochures and the descriptions of the programs for you. But I couldn't get out of my mind visiting about 5 years ago in the San Fernando Valley, a school that was the vast majority of students were Hispanic, And in the past, student achievement and attendance had been quite low. But finally, parents and teachers and a principal and community and business leaders who cared about children said enough is enough. They made that school a charter school, which meant that the parents and the teachers ran that school. And I saw parents who were coming to school themselves, staying afterwards to get tutored in English and learning how to use computers. The families and teachers banded together to get rid of the crack house that was just right outside the boundary of the school. The children started wearing uniforms, so there wasn't any distinction between, what kind of home a child came from and how much they could afford on clothes. We had parents who didn't have all those many resources themselves coming together to pool their energy on behalf of the school. Academic achievement soared. They had above 90% attendance rates, and the school was named a National Blue Ribbon School. Now that is a powerful example of what can be done when we have a partnership around children's needs. Today, I'm pleased to announce a number of new efforts to lift up the education and future of Hispanic children in America. For example, Head Start is taking new steps to better serve Hispanic children, something we've been working on for quite some time. AmeriCorps will increase the number of its Hispanic members. The Department of Education will ensure that schools participating in Title I are held accountable for helping the 3 million Hispanic students enrolled in them learn proficient English and meet all of their requirements in the challenging core academic subjects. Under the leadership of Secretary Bill Richardson, the Department of Energy will team up with the Latino Science and Engineering Consortium to identify, train, and nurture the next generation of scientists, engineers, technicians, and educators in math and science. I'm also pleased that the private sector has announced that it has commitments as well. Over the next 3 to 6 months, AT&T will team up with Hispanic organizations and work to close the technology gap for Latino youth throughout the nation. The Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, which has already pledged $83 million for after-school programs, will now work to increase Latino participation in them. And thanks to the national campaign to prevent teen pregnancy, Hispanic media leaders, many of whom are with us today, have made commitments to create PSAs, radio programs, talk shows, newspaper supplements, and other magazine features to improve the lives of Hispanic youth. Now, these are important steps, but I hope that out of this convening, we will make clear that these are not just steps for other people, there is something for all of us to do. I want to close by talking about another one of the valuable members of the White House staff here. That is one of my top aides, Patty Solis Doyle, who was the first person I hired when my husband said he was going to run for president. She was one of 6 children born to Mexican immigrant parents in a poor neighborhood in Chicago. Her mother made it only through the 6th grade. Her late father, a wonderful man, only had a 3rd grade education. But those 2 parents, despite their own lack of education, always believed that education was the key for success for their children. And they've had remarkable reasons to know that they were right. So as hard as they had to work, Patty's father would say over and over again to each of his children, "You must always value yourself." Well, Patty's brother is an alderman in the city of Chicago. Her other siblings are successful parents and workers and citizens. And if we do nothing else out of this convening, I hope we will send a message loudly and clearly to everyone in our society that when it comes to our children, we must give them a very clear and affirming message. And I think Patty's father's words are as good as any we could have. You must always value yourself. Because for many years from now, there will maybe perhaps be another convening in this East Room in 50 or 100 years. Maybe it'll be held in virtual reality by that time. And people will look back at us and they will ask, Did we just talk, or did we do? Have we been able to meet the challenges that our children face? And I hope that they will see this meeting as the beginning and not the end of a great national conversation. And I hope they will say that we did not leave any child behind, any Latino child, that we did not leave any community, any Latino community behind, that we helped everyone with the most important task we face, namely the raising of children. You know, I think it takes a village. I think it takes an American village. I think it takes a Latino village. I think it takes a village of all of us committed to our children. And I believe that many of you in this room are making good on building that kind of future for our children, and for that I am very, very grateful. I want to thank again everyone gathered at the satellite sites, and now I want to introduce someone who has been on the forefront of bringing these issues to our attention and making sure that nobody is left behind. Lucille Roybal-Allard is not only a congresswoman from California, she is the first Mexican-American woman to be elected to Congress, the first Latina to be appointed to the House Appropriations Committee, for which we are very grateful. And the first woman ever elected chair of the very important Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce her to you.
Okay, thank you very much. As chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I am honored to take part in this convening to help our Latino youth. And I commend First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton for hosting this event to highlight the challenges that we must meet in order to ensure that our country's Latino youth are given an opportunity to reach their full potential. I remember clearly that it was at a reception right here at the White House when the First Lady expressed concern about articles that she had read regarding the high dropout rate among Latino youth, as well as the high incidence of suicide among young Latinas. She told me then that she was going to do something to help address the serious problem. Today marks the fulfillment of the First Lady's promise, and for that I sincerely thank you. To the community agencies that are here, I welcome you and I thank you for the tremendous work that you do, not only in support of our Latino youth, but to improve the quality of life in communities throughout this nation. To the corporations that are here or who may be listening, I commend you and I thank you for recognizing the importance of today's meeting and for your continued leadership role in this effort. We are all aware that Latinos are poised to become the largest minority group in the nation by the year 2015. The highest concentration of Latinos will be in key states like California, New York, Florida, Illinois, and Texas. Therefore, if our country is going to continue to be a leader in this new and highly technical world economy, we need to ensure that Latinos and all Americans are provided equal opportunities in areas such as quality education, health care, child care, after-school programs, employment, and economic development. We cannot, as a nation, continue to prosper if we leave others behind. Nonprofit organizations are an integral part of our society, providing crucial services that otherwise may not be available to our communities. However, due to budget cuts and other factors, private sector participation is essential if community organizations are going to survive. Through public and private partnerships, we can successfully tackle the obstacles and the challenges that confront our Latino youth. In so doing, our young people will be provided with the keys to unlock the doors of opportunity for a productive and a fulfilled life. Today's meeting is a major step in that direction. But an important and integral part of this new partnership is the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who will work with the administration to continue the effort that has begun today. Caucus members are working tirelessly with the administration and the congressional leadership to assure that Latinos are provided with equal opportunities on critical issues and programs through policy and law. As I close, I would like to introduce the members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus once again individually, because each one has contributed tremendously to helping our young youth to achieve. We have with us Ruben Hinojosa from Texas, who is chair of the Education Task Force and has done a tremendous job in that area. If you would please stand once again as I call your name. Ciro Rodriguez, also from Texas, and also he is the second vice chair of our caucus. And Ciro is also the chair of the Caucus Health Task Force. We have with us a new member that we're very, very pleased is already contributing tremendously, not only to the Latino community, but to our efforts here in Congress, Grace Napolitano from California, who's on the Economic Development Task Force. Also from California, we have Loretta Sanchez, who is, as I think we all know, just a dynamic person who has really made her mark here in Congress, and she is a member of our Education Task Force. Loretta Sanchez. We also have my colleague from California, the former chair of the caucus, who demonstrated tremendous leadership in the last 2 years, and he is now the chair of our task force on Social Security, Javier Becerra. I understand also that Bob Underwood from Guam and a member of our Health Task Force is on his way. In closing, again, I would like to thank the First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton, for her commitment to the Latino community and to all of America's children. For she truly understands, as she mentioned a little earlier, that it takes not only a village, but a nation of villages working together to successfully raise our children. And I thank all of you for your support of our Latino youth and for recognizing that we cannot afford to ignore or to discriminate against any sector of our American society. If we do, we will ultimately be the victims of that neglect. Conversely, however, by helping our Latino youth and others to succeed, we will all be winners, and our nation will continue to be the world leader in the 21st century. Tenemos que asegurar que nuestros jóvenes latinos tienen las mismas oportunidades que todos reciben. Muchas gracias, and thank you.
Before we begin our discussion, we're going to be hearing from two scholars who will help us frame our dialogue with facts and analysis about the challenges and opportunities that Lucille just talked about and that our children face in three main areas: early childhood development, educational attainment, and youth issues. Then we will hear from some of you in the audience about strategies that are working in your communities and around the country. First, I would like to introduce our two researchers. Dr. Hector Cordero Guzman is the assistant professor at the Milano Graduate School of Management and Urban Policy at the New School University in New York. He will discuss community challenges in the areas of early childhood and youth. Following him, Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, Senior Research Scientist at the American Institutes for Research and Associate Professor at American University College of Education, will discuss some specific factors that comprise the schooling and overall educational experiences of our young people. I want first to turn to Dr. Hector Cordero Guzman and ask him, if he would, to give us a brief overview of such issues that are on the minds of all of us. Please welcome Dr. Cordero Guzman.
First Lady, I'm highly honored to be here with you, and I'm highly honored to be able to speak to an audience composed of people, a lot of whom I admire very much. I've been asked by the First Lady to help frame our discussion by making a few brief remarks on the challenges and opportunities facing Latino children and youth in the United States from the perspective of a researcher. The Latino population is large, diverse, growing, and relatively young. In 1990, there were 22.4 million Latinos in the United States, or 9% of the population. By the year 2000, Latinos are expected to be 11.1% of the US population, or a total of 30.6 million persons. But as many of you know, that depends on whether we count in Spanish or in English. Almost 1 out of every 3 Latinos in the country is less than 15 years of age. Latino children and youth are among the fastest growing segments of the US population. By the year 2000, the number of Hispanics with less than 24 years of age is expected to reach about 15 million persons, or 15% of a total youth population of about 98 million in the country. But unfortunately, the Latino population is also quite poor. The prevalence of high poverty rates in the Hispanic Latino community constitutes one of the main challenges to the development of Latino children and youth. But amidst all of those challenges, there are also many positive programs and hardworking individuals, some of whom are represented here at this meeting, that are a vital source of knowledge, strength, and support for Latino children and youth. Some of the main challenges to the development of Latino children and youth include, first, as I've mentioned, the effects of family poverty. Latino youth are among the most disadvantaged, with close to 42% living below poverty. The comparable number for whites is about 16%, and it's about 43% for African Americans. In New York City, for example, there are about 760,000 poor children under 18. That'll be more than the population of San Francisco. And 394,000, about the size of Atlanta, or 52%, are Latino children. 394,000 poor Latino children in New York City. Close to 6 out of every 10 Latino children in New York live below the poverty level, compared to 1 in 10 non-Hispanic white children. And we also know that many more Latinos live close to the poverty level, if not below it, 1 or 2 paychecks away, if you will. High levels of family poverty mean that Latino children and youth do not have access to the necessary material resources in their families and in their schools, or to the kinds of community-based programs that facilitate, support, and encourage their human development. Our second challenge involves healthcare. Lack of health insurance among many families, and some estimates suggest that 31% of Latino families do not have any insurance. And lack of access to preventive clinics and programs have significant impact on the health of Latino families and children. In many parts of the country, Latino children suffer disproportionately from higher rates of infant death and low birth weight. There is also a higher incidence of reports of child abuse and neglect. The prevalence of asthma and other diseases is quite high, and though they are moving in the right direction, that is, down, teen pregnancy and mortality rates, particularly homicides and suicides, are still high. Let me give you some examples. At the national level, in 1997, the birth rate of Latinas 15 to 19 years of age was double the national average. And approximately 1/4 of all births in the United States to women 15 to 19 were to Latinas. In New York City, about half of all the births to women 14 to 19 are born to Latinas. Suicide is another hidden but growing problem. 30% of Latino females and 17% of Latino male high school students in 1997 reported that they seriously considered attempting suicide, compared to 26% female and 14% for whites. While 15% of Latino females and 7% of Latino males said that they had actually attempted suicide in the previous year. 15% of Latino high school student females said they attempted suicide in the year before. Third, community issues and funding for programs and activities. Children live in communities, and these communities where they live have an impact on their growth and their development. Housing conditions, overcrowding, and homelessness affect many Latino children and youth. In numerous communities, there is a need for comprehensive community development initiatives. Unfortunately, the lack of educational and employment opportunities in some areas of the country contributes to an environment in which crime and gang-related problems continue to be prevalent. Children in the Latino community need more access to opportunities for their social, cultural, educational, and personal development. Many of the good programs that currently exist are full to capacity, and the needs in many communities for positive activities, resources to visit other places and programs, and additional programs and opportunities in which children and youth can be involved are very large. We have a large need for more slots. Our fourth challenge involves the effects of welfare policy, labor markets, and issues of youth employment. Changes in welfare policy have impacted many Latino families by reducing their access to social programs and decreasing the level of support provided by these programs. Many Latinos work in the low end of the labor market, where layoffs, long hours, and low wages are prevalent, and where opportunities for mobility are quite limited. The unemployment rate for young Latinos is almost twice as high as that of young whites. Latino youth are entering a challenging labor market, where wages and opportunities for mobility are tied to education and formal credentials. In this increasingly competitive context, our challenge is to provide Latino youth, as many organizations represented here are doing, with the education, training, job development, and post-placement career development supports that they will need to succeed. Our fifth challenge involves the role of immigration status. Many Latinos have been in the US for generations. However, the immigration status of some members of the community and language barriers mean that the population is often less informed, more vulnerable, and that it has less access to programs that promote the development of children and youth. The problem is not immigration or immigrants. They are a source of great strength for the nation. The challenge is to help Latino immigrants achieve their highest potential in the current policy environment. In the midst of these serious challenges, there are also sources of support and opportunities that need to be recognized and built upon. The main opportunities for the development of Latino children and youth include, number one, talented children and strong and loving families and communities. It is important to move away from deficit models and to recognize the talent, strength, creativity, and resiliency of Latino children and youth. The children are not the problem. Latino children and communities, Latino families and communities are also very strong and resilient. Successful efforts and programs begin by recognizing the talent of Latino children and the strength of the family, and work on providing support, resources for the household, and on removing obstacles and barriers to human development and social mobility. Poor does not mean bad or inept. Our second opportunity involves the fact that in recent years, the number and visibility of professionals, groups, organizations, and service providers in the Latino community, as we can all see, has increased appreciably. There are many community-based organizations with significant experience in the design, development, management, and evaluation of programs that help build, maintain, and rejuvenate our communities, and that also provide much-needed social services to our population. Each one of these programs is an asset, and it is important to draw on these resources, as we're doing today at the First Lady's urging, to build leadership around Latino child and youth development issues. Our third opportunity involves the positive effects of a growing economy. Economic growth during the last few years has increased the number of work opportunities for Latinos in the labor market. However, research shows that the Latino population is the first to feel economic downturns, and is more vulnerable to the fluctuations of the economy. Continued economic growth and increasing opportunities in families, schools, and communities are essential to the development of Latino children and youth. Latino children and youth are there in the numbers, but they're missing from planning, design, research, reporting, and policy on youth programs. We know a lot about what works. We know that WIC works, that prenatal care works, that childhood immunization works, that preschool education and Head Start work, that compensatory education works, that home visits and daycare work, that parent training works, that graduation incentives work, that juvenile crime prevention works, that youth employment and training works, and that substance abuse programs work. But we still need to know much more about how to replicate best practices, how to build and maintain organizational strengths and networks, and how to better reach and service the Latino community specifically. As the President was able to see during his recent visits, and as the Honorable First Lady knows really well, our communities have modest material resources, but they are rich in culture, knowledge, and in the quality of our people. As we discuss the challenges faced by our children and youth, let us also be mindful of the opportunities that are there to invest in our future. And let us redouble our commitment and our efforts as a nation to develop the full potential of each and every one of our children and youth. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Thank you very much, and I would like to just take that riff out of the end of your speech about this works, that works, this works, that works, and then,
It's yours.
you know, and yeah, I will steal that, but give you appropriate, but it's a good reminder that we do know what works if we can only bring it to scale, replicate it, hold people accountable for doing what works, and generally supporting these kinds of initiatives. Dr. Rodriguez, would you please give us a brief overview also of educational achievement and issues related to that?
Distinguished Mrs. Clinton, honored guests, a little more than 700,000 Hispanic children are being born this year. As we've been reminded by this date in 2015, the Hispanic children born today are turning about 16 years old. Will they be facing the same challenges that you face today as I ask you for a few brief minutes to think of yourself as a teenage Latino or Latina? If you're a typical Hispanic teenager today, you get tired, angry, frustrated, that you always have to fight the odds. Always. The condition of poverty that seriously affects your school impacts what your teachers and your schools can and cannot do for you. Poor or not, you probably have grown up knowing and speaking Spanish. It is at the core of your cultural experience with your family. You have learned from school and from some people in society that if you are bilingual and you speak Spanish, you are not expected to succeed academically, if at all. You know that this is what happened to many of your parents. You wonder what the big deal is in understanding that speaking two languages is one of the best ways to get ready to live, work, compete, and enjoy the new century. You experience 1 in every 5 of your friends dropping out of school or getting ready to. You fight a constant battle to stay engaged with your own learning. You know you cannot go to college if you do not graduate. You also are realizing you don't have the right credits. You do not know anyway how you could pay for it. And you wonder if college could really be a hope for you. Now I want you to take a step and see yourself as a member of the current Hispanic population in the United States. 20% of you have less than 7 years of elementary schooling. Only 27% of you have graduated from high school. This means that nearly half of the current Hispanic population in the United States has a high school or less education. Only 6% of us have earned a bachelor's degree. and only about 1% or less has earned a master's, a doctoral, or a professional degree. Additionally, in the K-12 system, on average, among all children, Hispanic students continue to lag about 2 years behind mainstream white students in standardized measures of performance in mathematics, science, and English. These trends are incompatible with the role that we must play now and in the years just ahead. Educational attainment is strongly correlated to economic and democratic prosperity for both the individual and for society. There are 3 major challenges to educational attainment that I ask you to consider and to take with you. 1, the against all odds mentality that poor Hispanic children and youth live with every day of their lives is robbing them of the interest and the motivation necessary for educational success. It is in this phenomenon, our Hispanic students are joined in the same frustrations by their poor white, black, Asian, Pacific Islander, Alaskan, and Native American peers. 2, the challenge of building and maintaining engagement with learning is central to educational growth. Engagement that results in Hispanic students wanting to learn more. Engagement that results in Hispanic students enjoying learning enough to want to not stop. Engagement that results in schools and teachers knowing how to build on the unique gifts of linguistic and cultural diversity. 3, accept the challenge today that post-secondary attainments of Hispanics is absolutely essential to ensure the emergence of Hispanic leadership in civic and political life, in business and health, in education, and in all aspects of American culture for the 21st century. Based on 25 years of personal experience as a researcher, a teacher, and a professor, I recommend these specific opportunities for policy and practice. Known successful bilingual education models need wide dissemination and support. At the elementary level, especially in dual immersion programs, both first language Spanish and first language English speakers are scoring at or above grade level in reading and mathematics over control group peers. As a multiracial population, Hispanics have much to teach and share with each member of our American family. Building on kindergarten and early childhood learning, engaging children in grades 1 through 3 in challenging, hands-on, problem-based learning, we know from the research has lasting positive effects on academic performance. Integrating peer tutoring, kids teaching kids, across all subjects is the least costly, but the least used. Hispanic students get the message early on that their academic success is not an expected norm, but rather an exception. Hispanic students also are generally tracked into non-college preparatory sequences. Today, Hispanic students, Latinos and Latinas, are receiving on average more vocational course credits than academic credits, and are less likely to take algebra, geometry, and science courses, the minimum requirements for college admission. Did you know that today there are only 6 states in the Union that require algebra for high school graduation? There is not one state that requires geometry for all students for high school graduation. We need to get serious about high standards and make school boards and state departments of education accountable to provide the level of resources required for high standards learning. We invest in schools and teachers like gambling. We place small bets and expect huge winnings. We need to heavily invest in attracting the brightest and the best that we can to teach and to stay in teaching. Individuals who love what and how they teach and are not destroyed in the process by the way their schools and their school districts are organized. Performance-based learning in middle school and high school can jumpstart academic gains. Because it builds on self-directed learning like technology, it also yields the motivation to learn, which is what sustains learning for the rest of one's life. Performance-based learning applies apprenticeships and mentorships to everyday real-world problems. Students perform the thinking and the skills necessary for productive living, giving them options to create solutions that are discipline-specific, for example, in business, in the arts, in the health professions, and in science and engineering-related professions. Remember, most students do not enroll in college if they do not complete high school. Several educational reforms based on systemic and partnership approaches are demonstrating success with Hispanic and other minority students. Working with regular schools and magnet schools, this is the arena where business, industry, philanthropy, and community-based and social service organizations can make significant contributions, which some have started. Since the majority of Hispanic students and most minority students who complete high school or its equivalent enroll in higher education at the community college level, community colleges need support. They need support to develop and offer job training and retraining, to develop literacy and numeracy among critical masses of U.S. and immigrant Hispanics, to build Hispanic capacity in technology, to ensure successful transitions to four-year institutions, and least and very importantly, provide opportunities for lifelong learning. With a population of 50% with less than high school or less, we have a big job in lifelong learning. Finally, graduating unprecedented numbers of Hispanic students from colleges and universities must become a national priority. How to do so is well established in the wide range of empirical research on student persistence and retention. I have been studying Hispanic educational success for 25 years. We don't show our age. We know how to keep students in college. The number one reason why Hispanic students do not complete college is financial. This has been the case, is the case, and will continue to be the case. Grants and scholarships are much more likely to increase Hispanic post-secondary attainment than loans. But don't stop the loans. Mentorships with faculty in partnership with public and private sponsors also are strongly related to the completion of post-secondary degrees by Hispanic students. Only students with baccalaureate degrees can pursue postgraduate work. For master's, professional, and doctoral degrees, we know that higher education translates to high rates of community and public service, as well as benefiting economic and democratic progress. I believe what Mrs. Clinton wants us to do is to change the course of the river for our Hispanic young people, starting now. Our responsibility is to fill our Hispanic students and their peers with the hope, the dreams, and the tools to build and value their futures with their minds and their know-how, not just with their hands. We have the students, we have the solutions. Thank you, Mrs. Clinton, for this unprecedented national dialogue today on Hispanic young people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez. Thank you. Thank you so much. And as Dr. Rodriguez was concluding those eloquent remarks, I thought of that old story that some of you may also know, and maybe it was provoked in you, the story of the river going through the village, and one day children start coming down this river, and they're drowning, and everybody gathers at the side of the river and starts pulling the children out, but they keep coming one after another in terrible distress. And finally one man walks away, and his neighbors turn and say, "Where are you going? We need your help to get these children out of the river." And he says, "I'm going upstream to find out why they're falling into the river." And I think that to a large extent we have to do both. We have to get them out of the river, we have to prevent them from falling into the river, and as Dr. Rodriguez said, we have to change the course of the river. And it was very touching to have both of these researchers speak so passionately, which you could hear in their voices. I have taken to saying to groups of Latino children when I visit a school or a high school or a civic group or an after-school program, I now say to them, every one of you is smarter than I am about something because you speak 2 languages and I don't. And when I started saying that, several of them would come up to me and say that they'd never thought about it before. I said, well, think about this. You have mastered 2 languages, at least orally, which is more than the vast majority of Americans have. So I think we are very well equipped and poised to be able to give this message of hope and affirmation and validation and encouragement and high standards and expectations to our children. And someone who has been leading the White House effort on that behalf is going to speak with us now and then moderate some discussion. Sarita Brown, for those of you who know her, is the Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans and has been deeply committed to these issues. And much of the progress that we are making and those big budget numbers in the President's budget have been a part of her mission. So Sarita, would you please take over from here?
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Clinton, for gathering us here in the White House for this conversation. And thank you very much to dear colleagues, Hector Cordero Guzman and Carlos Rodriguez, for your sobering words and your clear delineation of the context in which we have this conversation. All of us in this room confront this reality. Many of you, with every waking moment, tackle these issues and seek to change them. What we've done is identify several of you to talk with us, tell us your stories, and to have us all think together about our own personal responsibility in changing the course of the river and helping make the lives of all of our young people, con todo cariño, the kind of future we think that they can have. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to wrap our arms around this very big topic and tackle it by first looking at early childhood, then looking at education, and then looking at youth and community. So let's begin by looking at the question of early childhood and what we know that's working and what we want to do even better. I'd like to introduce Maria Gomez and ask her to stand so that she can tell us a bit about what's happening here in Washington, D.C. at the Mary Center. Maria?
Good morning, Mrs. Clinton. Good morning, Mrs. Clinton, everyone. It's really a pleasure, and I'm very proud to be here today. I'm very proud for a couple of reasons. One is that I grew up as a teenager from another country, came here as a teenager, went to school here, so I know what it's like to be an adolescent coming new into this country. And I'm one of those folks that stayed in the community and has created, along with many of my partners here, Maria Tuqueva, who runs the Bell Multicultural Center, and Lori Kaplan, who runs a youth program and daycare center that we work very much involved with, Calvary Daycare Center. But all of the centers here in the District of Columbia really, really are integral to the part of early childhood. I don't think that Mary Center could, with the services that it has, function without this collaboration. At Mary Center, and I like to say that I hope that many of the early childhood programs really start, and I think many of us forget, that they start with the families first, the women and the men of which these children are born from. We forget about supporting the women, supporting the men in terms of their education, in terms of their life skills, as Dr. Rodriguez and Cordero Guzman have talked about. We take them in at that stage. We take them at an early stage. We make sure that kids are attending school, that they stay in school with the support of the programs that I just mentioned. We make sure that if they are in wanting to plan a family, unlike many issues that you hear in the public sector, that many of our communities are single parents. I want to say today that many of our young people are not single parents. They're married, not married through the court, not married through the church, but married to themselves to be together for a family. And so we deal with the issues of planning for that family, making sure that once they decide to have a family, that they get the best prenatal care possible. And I want to thank this administration again for all the strides that they've made in terms of covering many of our people through Medicaid. That's been a long stride in the issue of the public charge has been a very important issue in terms of our children and our families getting into some kind of insurance so that they can receive prenatal care. As you know, many of the states still have a long way to go for that. But we deal with the prenatal care, we deal with in-home visits. The home visits are very important, as Dr. Cordero mentioned, in terms of assessing not only the physical part of the women, but what's happening in the home. What is happening in the home that's preventing people from getting care, from getting the education that they need. Then we take and we have that child, and one of the beautiful things that we've seen, and I think the researchers will reassure this, that if we have the male, that if we have the support system in the home, in the hospital setting or in the home where that child is born, that those parents, those family members tend to be more attached to that child. Then we take that child and we support them through the whole well and sick child visits. Within the center, we not only concentrate on the wellness of that child, but we concentrate also on making sure that we give the parents skills that are necessary to make sure that not only the parents understand, but that from an early start, the child really understands that there's people who love him, that he has all the capacities, is what's said here, that we work on the self-assurance, self-assertiveness of that child from day one, because it starts in utero. And then we work through that, and then the biggest piece that we do with the children is to make sure that the issues of lead, the issues of making sure that parents know where Head Start is. When we did an assessment of the center a few years ago, there were only about 5% of the families in our center. Out of 3,000 or so families, only 5% of our families knew where the nearest Head Start program was, or even knew what Head Start was. And these are families that have been here, not just yesterday, not just 5 years ago. Some of them have been here 10, 15 years. So part of the healthcare center that we have is comprehensive in terms of making sure that we have volunteers, that every time a child comes in, that we, besides asking how you're doing today, that we're saying, what school is that child going to? Do you know about Head Start programs? And referring them to the different issues. The same thing with children with disabilities. We make sure that every child, regardless of whatever the disability is, and in a large part of our community, the biggest disability is around language. And many of us will tell us that it's bilingual education that is the problem, and that is not the problem. The problem is the education that our parents are not receiving, the lack of adult education programs, the lack of schools, and the lack of information that our families are receiving for early childhood programs. So
thank you, Maria.
thank you.
Thank you. I think in those comments, you hear the kind of comprehensive approach that those who work day to day in communities know that these centers have to provide. This was a characterization here in our nation's capital, but there are programs all over the country. We've had the commission, the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans introduced, and one of those commissioners is Gloria Rodriguez. Gloria founded an organization called Avance, and it is focused on education in the earliest of years and in parents. Gloria, in the 25 years that Avance has been doing this work, what have you found that makes the most significant difference in allowing these parents to provide their very young children with the kind of beginning they deserve?
What makes the difference at Avance and Avance works, we have been seeing that 94% of our children living in a housing project are graduating from high school. 43% are going on to college. And what the results are that they come about because Avance is there in their community providing comprehensive community-based services. They are continuous. We start with early childhood, parenting, home visits, making sure they get immunized, connecting them to social services. But at the same time, we go from birth to 3 all the way to college. For the parents, we support them in connecting them with literacy classes, learning English, getting job skills. And so it is a very comprehensive approach, working both with mothers and fathers, building the family, and giving them hope that there is a better future for them. And so Avance has been evaluated by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. We've shown that there are changes in knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. We've replicated it in 9 cities throughout the state of Texas, having provided services for 80,000 individuals. So the outcomes are similar. What we now need is to get it to more cities. We know how to replicate a program that works. Now we need to take it across the country. And I want to thank you, First Lady Hillary Clinton, for your dedication and commitment to the Latino children. We know what works. We just need the ganas and the people who empower, who have the influence to create the changes that we need to create. We have many, many models throughout Texas, and we have many individuals already changing their lives and being great examples of what can happen with good types of programs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Gloria and I went to France together about 10 years ago to look at early childhood programs, and I think that what you just heard in a very brief form, you should really see for yourself, and you should read the evaluations of Avance, because it is one of the most effective community building, youth building, parent support, education encouraging programs, not just for Hispanic families and children, but really around the country. And Gloria, I believe that you brought with you today Maria Huerta, a woman who has been involved in your program for a number of years. And perhaps, Maria, as someone who has seen Avance from the perspective of a participant, you could describe a little bit about your involvement.
Thank you for having me here today. Like you mentioned in your intro, I would never have thought that I would be here at the White House, especially with the reserved seat. I'm one of examples of struggles Hispanic youth and children face today and even many years past. I want to tell you how I found Avance, a great family support Ms. Rodriguez mentioned. I'm a 26-year-old, a single mother of 2, born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. My mother, who had a third-grade education, held 2 jobs at time and raised them. With her children in a 3-bedroom household in the projects on the west side of San Antonio. We lived in poverty, and we were surrounded by poverty and violence. As the youngest of 6 children, I am the only one who has graduated from high school. And as Mr. Carlos Rodriguez, Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, mentioned, I was that typical teenager then. But with the will and determination to succeed, I began my college studies in 1991. I was a recipient of an athletic scholarship to a local university then. However, I became pregnant with my first child in my second years of studies. Then I was studying nursing. With family and friend support, I did every means to stay in school as a full-time student. I transferred to a local community college then, and after giving birth to my son, 11 months later, I became pregnant with my second child. I had the support from family and friends then, but after my second child, I no longer had the encouragement. I was taking care of my two children, and at that time, my mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I also was caring for her as well. With no income, living at home with my mom and my son and daughter, I felt the impossible then. In 1995, after a rigorous search, I found Avance, a nonprofit family support education program, as Dr. Rodriguez mentioned. The biggest obstacle in my life then was childcare for my son and daughter. After having just received an academic transfer scholarship from St. Mary's University in San Antonio. After many phone calls and finding the support I needed, Avance was there to help. They offered their assistance and also told me about a wonderful program that encouraged early childhood education. I became an active participant in the program in the summer of '95. I attended the parent education classes twice a week and participated in other services within the Avance curriculum, and my children attended the early childhood education that they provided. I learned how important my role was as a first teacher to my children. Not only did I find the lack of confidence I once lacked, the confidence I once lacked, but I wanted my children to have that confidence as well and to see them in their mother. The support from the Avance staff and you friends I made was overwhelming. They believed in me, and most of all, I believed in myself again. My children and I graduated from the program in 1996, and I remained as an active participant in the Avance Early Head Start program. I volunteer my time as the chairwoman of the Avance Policy Council. My greatest reward is giving back to those that helped me through my struggles and Avance business that. I graduated from St. Mary's University last year with a BA in accounting, and I'm currently working full-time as an accountant, and I'm working on my master's degree in education, a concentration in mathematics. My daughter, Hannah, who is 4 years old, is currently in Head Start. My son graduated this year from Head Start and is now starting kindergarten. Aside from being an active single mother of two, I manage my time to give back to the community. I volunteer with Avance. I volunteer at my daughter's Head Start Center and also at the local YMCA. I'm extremely grateful for the role Avance played in my life. But most of all, I'm very proud of hearing my children say that they would like to graduate from college like their mother did. Someday they will understand the struggles that I went through to achieve such an accomplishment, and they will look on proudly.
In Maria's comments, the heritage of education and achievement is so clear, and having the opportunity of meeting people who have participated in early childhood efforts to see the benefit and to see the legacy continue is a real inspiration. But now we have to turn our attention to this category of education, which Carlos has given us lots to think about and many of you know about. And to start this, what I'd like us to do is to turn our attention to an effort that really focuses on something we call these days systemic reform, looking at how it is that the educational system, the schools, the classroom, the teachers, the curriculum, come together so that all young people have the opportunity to make the choice of their future because they do have the academic preparation. And I'd like to ask Emily Cole from Project Grad in Houston, Texas, to tell us particularly about the effect that systemic reform has had in Houston on all the young people who go through the system school, but very specifically on the Latino students who go through.
Thank you, I surely will. Mrs. Clinton and distinguished guests, I am principal of Davis High School in the Houston Independent School District. 10 years ago, the sentence, "I want you to go to college," a simple sentence of hope, spoken by Mr. Kettleson, who was then CEO for Tenneco Inc., spoken to a class of 9th grade students at my school, opened the door where we saw, at today's class of 99, we have seen an increase of college recipients going from 10% at that particular time to 74%. To do that, that data, it is the result of team effort and collaborations, systemic changes in the school, reform movements, curriculum changes, all joined together, giving the students the hope. They accepted that challenge and proved us that they also want to achieve. The data is positive. The dropout data was not. That led us to then start looking at what we were getting at the 9th grade level and how we could improve that. Project Grad is a program that has assisted us in making the curriculum changes K through 12. Programs that started in elementary schools, systemic commitment for, I have a fly coming around here.
It's the White House fly.
The White House fly.
He comes to every event.
The Project Grad started 5 years ago with a particular math program, because that was a weak area at the high school level, that would involve manipulatives and a different approach to math, a particular reading program, a discipline program that taught students how to become learners and not just visitors to the school, and a program called Communities in Schools that assist the families with their personal community and family problems so that the students could come to school ready for instruction. Project Grad has completely changed the neighborhood. The parents are now particularly involved in the school. We do have a parent university. They have to commit 7 hours of instruction in support of this particular program and how to encourage their students. I have to end with the story to show you systemic change in that neighborhood, because people can talk about systemic change, but when you actually see it, you want to believe, and it happened to me last week. A husband and his wife came into my office determined to talk to me about the students, their child's schedule for next year. I kept trying to send them to a counselor. They kept wanting to talk to me. They walk in, they have a notebook in their hand, and they want to make sure that the child has gotten the AP calculus class. They want to make sure that these particular classes are being offered and that the child has the classes. And so I assured them that they would. And they said, "We want him to go to college." They were wearing a custodial uniform that said custodial staff, Rice University. When we continued talking about their child and what the child had to do their senior year, they said, "We want him to go to Rice University." So the sentence of hope, "I want you to go to college," uttered by Mr. Kettleson, the parents are now saying, "I want my child to go to a particular college." Thank you.
Thank you.
In making these kinds of efforts possible, not only are you able to do it with the strong will of your own community, but there are others who see that kind of promise and want to support it. I'd like to ask Stephen Zwirling to tell us about the role that the Ford Foundation has played in Project Grad, but also in helping others across the country look at these kinds of strategies.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. This is truly a historic day. Just a quick word about Project Grad and Ford Foundation's interest in Project Grad, and then a few comments about the new federal initiative, Gear Up, that the Ford Foundation is also working with. First of all, Project Grad. Back to Hector's riff about the things that work. I'm going to steal that too.
That's a grant request.
I think you already have a grant from the Ford Foundation. A lot of us who, and I don't show my age either, I'm from Brooklyn. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I've been maddened with frustration about why is it, this is something that you, Mrs. Clinton, raised as well, why is it that there are all these things that work, and somehow or another we can't seem to either replicate them, and even more significantly, bring them to scale, bring them to not hundreds of students and young people, but to literally thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And one of the things that we at the Ford Foundation have been attempting to do for the past decade is to find things that work, replicate them at scale. And Project Grad is the best living example that I've seen. Not only is it underway in Houston, where quickly it's moving to serve 65,000 students in 85 schools, demonstrating in hard data, not just anecdotes, that kids from inner cities can in fact learn, go to college and succeed in college, and defy the kind of biased perceptions that these kinds of kids can't learn. But also Project Grad now is kind of leaping across the country. It's underway with funding from Lucent Technologies and Ford Foundation and others in Newark, in Los Angeles, in Columbus, Ohio. There's someone in the room today who's helping to bring it to Nashville, Tennessee. The new superintendent of schools in Atlanta is bringing Project Grad to Atlanta. It is extraordinary, and it works with literally thousands of students, not just dozens or hundreds. The Gear Up initiative, which your husband proposed, and Chaka Fattah in the House, and Senator Jeffords in the Senate, it's a bipartisan initiative which was funded miraculously and received $120 million for this fiscal year, last year at about this time. In part is modeled after Project Grad and initiatives that are systemic, large scale, and that put together clusters of things to work and kind of overlapping initiatives. So as kids move through the school system, they move through life, that we don't just have a sort of a magic solution here or there. We know that doesn't really work, but rather there's something for pre-K kids, there's something at the K level, and all the way on through college. So there is a series of aligned, overlapping kind of initiatives that have proven to be successful and in the aggregate produce remarkable results. Gear Up is attempting to do precisely those kinds of things in communities all over the country. The Ford Foundation has made grants to a group to help bring together Gear Up grant recipients to provide technical assistance so that these Gear Up projects have a good chance to succeed. It's an initial commitment. Hopefully Congress will fund it in future years, and the Ford Foundation will expand its commitment to working very closely with the administration, the Department of Education on things of this kind. In addition, and finally, the funders are preaching this kind of collaboration, and we really don't do a good job of it ourselves, frankly. There are funders in this room, both private and corporate. We'll be having lunch together after this meeting to try to talk with each other, be hosted by the Kellogg Foundation and the Ford Foundation, to talk about ways of working together on initiatives of this kind that are truly systemic, large in scale, and take things that work and put them into widespread practice.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
We said that this was a beginning, and we really want to build on it, and that's a very good example of how we intend to build on this. In terms of these kinds of systemic reforms, we have an example here in Houston, Texas, but the kind of academic intervention that has been a long tradition for us, We know in mentorship programs and tutorial programs. I'd like to call on Carmen Vega Rivera from the East Harlem Tutorial Program in New York to tell us a little bit about how they have, over a sustained period of time, brought young people to the highest academic achievement.
Good morning, Mrs. Clinton and distinguished guests. East Harlem Tutorial has a 40-year history, and I've had the pleasure of being its executive director for 11 years. And I have to put it into the context of what happened to me as a young girl, first-generation Puerto Rican, also of migrant workers from a very small town in Puerto Rico, both parents having a third-grade education, coming and living in the Lower East Side. One thing that my parents didn't know was basically they had to be savvy. In order for us to succeed, I'm the middle of 5 children, they had to tap into all the resources locally as we grew up in the housing projects on the Lower East Side. My father and my mother instilled in us the value of education, at the same time looking for youth programs, after-school programs that would support what we needed to grow up with, because language was an issue. And we went to Henry Street Settlement. And from the age of 5 all the way up, I stood at Henry Street Settlement. Being part of Aspira, I'm an aspirante in the 60s, 1969. I was part of the art club. I attended all the art classes. I was part of other leadership teams. I got my first employment job at Henry Street Settlement at the age of 14. And at the age of 16, I was making $5 an hour in the 70s. And what they instilled in me was I had a passion for the arts. And between my parents and growing up in the settlement and having a very strong youth development program, I became a professional artist. I majored in the fine arts, went to NYU, painted murals, designed booklets for the Board of Ed, trilingual, Spanish and English. Why am I telling you all this? I went into the world of the museums as a curator. I loved it for many years, but I felt the passion that I had to give back to my community, and I went into East Harlem to give back to the young people exactly what my parents had offered me through their own values, as well as what Henry Street Settlement instilled in me. And what I do at East Harlem Tutorial is I recruit young people like Nicole Marrero and Jaime Rivera from the age of 6 years of age, and they can come through the program throughout high school, and we bring them back as college interns, so that not only do we do a rigorous academic program, not remedial in tutorial, not in the remedial sense, but the holistic sense, and that they get academic support with volunteers, 400 a year, come through our agency, high school students, including private schools, all the colleges and universities, but a core number of professionals in the field who volunteer an entire academic year to work with young people. And in many of those relationships, we've had relationships that have gone on for over 10 years. So these are truly committed volunteers who basically match with a young person, who are trained and provided the support. And each young person receives specific goals and objectives in math, reading, science, social studies, and computers, as well as personal growth. And we track them. In addition to balance the scale, not only do we do the academics, we also do the youth development model, core competencies, building on the assets, looking at their interests, and everything that we do is develop around that model, finding them job employments, taking them to college trips as opposed to talking about colleges and universities, involving them in leadership models. They are part of the Youth Advisory Committee, making decisions, having conversations, deciding what the future will bring. How do we change the program? And so we are comprehensive, and that we look at a holistic model from very young throughout high school. And since I've been there, it's been an honor to see some of the young people that came through the program through junior high school now being college interns and graduating with their BS or master's from Tufts, Brown, Union, you name them, city colleges and state. They come back as volunteers or as paid staff, and we also have alumni in our organization. We're a privately funded organization. It is community-based. Most of our students, 70% are Latino, with the population changing. It's changing from primarily of Puerto Rican descent to Dominican and Mexican. And we feel a need to give back to the community. And to make it more interesting, in the 40-year history of East Harlem Tutorial, I am the first Hispanic or Latina to take on the leadership of this organization, and I'm proud that I have young people following in my footsteps. Thank you.
In in hearing about the educational scenario, one of the things that Carlos mentioned that is the fork in the road for many young people is the question of financial support. I'd like to ask John Guerra, Vice President with AT&T, to tell us about the role that AT&T employees play in something called the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, and to tell us about AT&T's support for education.
Thank you, thank you. It's an honor, First Lady, to be here. Chair, elected officials, friends, guests. I'm actually here wearing two hats. One, AT&T, and it's interesting to hear from a number of the programs and the leaders of the programs, because AT&T has been involved, at least financially, if not from other assets, with a number of the programs here this morning, and particularly from hearing the success stories. But I also wear the hat of National President of the Hispanic Employee Associations of AT&T, which has been involved for a long time, in fact, since 1989, with an organization called the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, of which most of you are knowledgeable, founded in 1975 very specifically to give scholarships to Latino youths to get to college. The fund has struggled. In 1989, the 23 chapters of HISPA, the Hispanic Employee Associations, adopted the fund, and in combination with all the other chapters has been able to raise money for that, and specifically challenge the corporation who agreed to match the fundraising, and until just recently was the single largest fundraiser for funds for scholarships of $1.6 million as of this year for scholarships for Latino youth. Now, I have to say, until just recently, I'm also here representing a very dear friend of mine, the president of that fund, Sarah Martinez Tucker, who unfortunately could not be here today, and asked me to say on behalf that she, who was a member of HISPA and then retired from AT&T and then became president of the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, would like for me to share with you that she has just received from the Lilly Foundation a $50 million endowment for scholarships for Latinos, the single largest. And quickly, to Dr. Rodriguez's point, the funds is a single bar that seems to get in the way, but what we also found was knowledge and access to those funds is the next bar to that. And so AT&T, working with the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, is creating a partnership for Hispanic Scholarship Fund Education, which is to create a network, literally, so that students among all of the high schools across the nation will be able to access, through the internet technology, a site where they will have access to all sources available, and, as Sarah shared with me, also create chat rooms, because we found that the ability to share the lack of knowledge or the need for the cultural experience is important. And we will be rolling that out with Hispanic Scholarship Fund within the next 3 to 4 months. So that's why I'm here today, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You know, in response to that very fine announcement about the Lilly Foundation's support, and in following up on what Stephen Zwirling said about the Ford Foundation, I'm delighted that there's going to be a gathering of foundations and business leaders after this for lunch, because I know that there is even more that could be done, and especially in the stock market, which has raised the value of so many foundations and corporations. You know, putting some additional funding into scholarship assistance and into proven programs like Avance or Project Grad or whatever else we are going to be talking about and are highlighted would be a very, very good investment. So I'm delighted that that's going to go forward.
And now we would like to turn our attention to youth and community. We have, throughout this discussion, acknowledged that young people are part of families, schools are part of community, and that it really is a whole system. And many of you approach these issues and seek to make changes in that way. I'd like to begin with Margarita Rosa, Executive Director of the Grant Street Settlement in New York.
Good morning, Mrs. Clinton and distinguished colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here today. It was very nice to hear Carmen Vega Rivera speak about her experiences on the Lower East Side with an organization very much like our own. At the Grand Street Settlement, we serve about 5,000 people a year, and we serve entire families, from children in early Head Start to young teenagers in the AmeriCorps program, all the way through to senior citizens. I was asked to focus primarily on the work that we're doing with young people on pregnancy prevention. Our approach to all of the young people who use our services and all of the families, but particularly the young people, is not to perceive them as youth at risk, but to quote someone whose pregnancy prevention model we're following at the moment, Dr. Michael Carrera, to look at our young people as young people at promise. And we build on their strengths. And one of the things, we learn many things about what young people need in order to be strong and successful. And among them is a safe place to go. Relationships and lasting relationships with responsible adults and strong relationships with the adults in their own families. And so we help to build those relationships through mentoring programs as well as family supports. They also need information about their bodies, about how to negotiate relationships, because without the information, they don't know what to avoid. And they also need a vision of a future. Young people who have a vision of a future that expands beyond the confines of the 4 blocks that they live on, with the limitations in some instances that go with that, have the ability very often to put off parenting to a time when they can be better parents to their children. And we also know that supporting them in their educational efforts, providing tutoring, working with the schools, and making the schools provide what those young people need is a role that we can play. We also provide them with the opportunity to earn some money, because young kids, particularly in poor neighborhoods like our own, have a lot of tempting ways, some of them not consistent with legality, to obtain incomes. But we try to fight that, and we try to give them stipended jobs and opportunities for employment within the community. Our AmeriCorps service providers are interwoven into all of our programs so that they provide services for our children in early Head Start, for the children in our after-school programs. They work as counselors in our summer day camps, some of them. And so we have an integrated approach to the services that we provide. And finally, community service. Giving young people the opportunity to give back to their communities. We don't only give to them, we expect them to give to everyone around them. And they play a very big and important part. They welcome that, and I think that that is one model, the settlement house model, the comprehensive model of services to young people, families, and communities, that works. And I'm very proud to have the opportunity to share with you information about our organization, the Grand Street Settlement. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Clinton talked about the Puente Learning Center in her opening comments. The White House initiative had the privilege of working with the staff of the center when we took a conference, Excelencia en Educación, the role of parents in the education of their children, to Los Angeles. And it has been a real pleasure to get to know Sister Jenny. I'd like her to stand and talk a little bit about how it is that this center continues to sparkle in the neighborhood, because having visited, it is as lovely, I can imagine, as it was the day it opened. How did you build it, and how does it stay so strong?
AT&T supports us. Mrs. Clinton, it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank you again for visiting Puente. It's still a topic of conversation. But I'd also like to thank Congresswoman Roybal and Becerra for being so supportive of education in our city. They are very visible and always available whenever we need them. The organization that I run, Puente Learning Center, is an intergenerational center serving students from ages 3.5 to 87. We have 2,000 students a day. We're supported by corporations and foundations. All of our classes are tuition free. Actually, Puente wasn't conceived in this way. It was something that I really didn't mean to do, but that happens with a lot of projects. In 1985, I had 6 months off to study, and not being the greatest student in the world, I chose the easiest way out and took night classes and then volunteered in our Los Angeles community during the daytime. I went to 4 public schools and asked if there was anything I could do to help out. And each principal asked if I would work with first and second graders who were not doing well. And so I said, surely I will. After a few months, I had 60 children under my wings with no help. So I said, why don't you bring your parents in to give me some help? And you know that within 2 weeks, every single parent came to help out, but couldn't speak English, didn't have opportunity for education. And I was so struck with the fact that every child that was having a problem didn't have the support system that our children need. And so today, 1,700 of our 2,000 students are adults. With the children, I'd like to say something before I talk about the children's programs, because I think that's kind of what you want me to talk about, is, as I said, we get our funding from corporations and foundations, and almost every RFP asks for what are we doing for children at risk. I hate to label children at risk. There was a book out a few years ago, A Nation at Risk, and that's what we might label ourselves, but it just bothers me about labeling children. And I think probably the biggest risk, if we want to say, that we have is letting potential drop through the cracks. We have many students with potentials. It's kind of the difference between the haves and the have-nots. These children have potential. They have not the opportunities to grow that potential. And so that's what we're trying to do at Puente. Anyway, the way it got started and all these levels of students is that after working with the children and the adults, one parent came to me and said, Jenny, I have a 4th grader who can't read. So I said, well, we don't have a program, but bring her over and we'll do something. Well, 2 days later, she came with 15 children, so that started our after-school program for elementary children. Then a high school student whom I had taught in 8th grade told me he wasn't graduating from high school. He was in a local Catholic high school, and I said, well, that's ridiculous, you're a good student. He said, well, I failed history and have to take it this summer. So I called the principal, and I said, you know, I'm a credential teacher, why don't I give him the course and let him graduate with his class? He said, well, we have 25 other students, let's bring them on over. So that started our high school program. So the whole project has really grown from the needs of our community, which is the way I think most projects ought to grow. We have 103 5-year-old children. 50 come in the morning and 50 in the afternoon. And what we try to do is prepare them with a strong foundation so that when they go to school, they're not different. Anyway, they leave Puente verbally bilingual, which Mrs. Clinton, I'm jealous of too. They can all read and write, and they can all use computers. We have our elementary, about 100 elementary children who come after school. And again, that's an enrichment program, a tutoring program. Last summer, tried a project which Dr. Zacharias, I'd like to see if we couldn't pilot in our schools, an English-only law passed in California. And I was very concerned about our children. So we called one of the public schools and said, last summer, and said, could you send us over 25 or 30 children, 4th, 5th grade, who are non-English speaking, and see if we can't have some kind of an immersion program and help them out. So we did a 6-week immersion program with these children, 5 hours a day, and then followed it through during this year on an after-school program. They are all reading English at grade level, which I kind of think that maybe if we could take some time out of our school year and just have some kind of an immersion so that these children, again, are not different and are not dropping out in 5th and 6th grade. Our high school program, I'm not going to speak about because I have Miguel Flores here with me today, and we were asked to bring one of our high school students, but sometimes I think the proof is in what happens after you've attended a school, not while you're there. And so if it would be all right, I'd like Miguel to say a few words.
Please.
Thank you, Mrs. Clinton. Thank you all for coming. Yes, Puente has been a valuable resource in the Boyle Heights community. I could remember every day when I used to walk to school, I used to pass by the old site and I would see Sister Jenny opening up the gate, and she would, invite me in, and she told me about the after-school program. So I went, and basically it was a small little room with 9 computers, and I started going, and the technology was there. It was something that the public school at my school did not really have. So, for example, at Puente, we had 386 IBM processors, while at school you still had Apple IICs. It was that open access that, you know, that Puente, from that moment, sort of said, you can do it. And as the public school system sometimes, well, you guys could do that. You guys could do without AP classes, what have you. It was always that Puente never said, there was always the encouragement. You had professionals such as Professor David Blinder from UCLA, who came and taught writing courses that were not taught in the public school. You had lawyers from local law firms. You had UCLA students come together, and it was that resource. My sister also benefited from Puente. She went also to the high school program with me after I found out about it. And she attended Phillips Academy, and now she's going to graduate from Wesleyan University in the coming year. And my mom also has taken advantage of the program. She started ESL classes there, not knowing she had a third grade education coming from Mexico. She started going to the classes, and now she even got her high school diploma. I mean, she even... She felt very happy, you know, to be able to read and write. Like, for example, when she was taking her high school history class, I told her, look at those books I have. I have tons of history books. You'll find everything. And she felt very proud that, you know, that information was open. And that's sort of what Puente Learning Center creates. And while I was there, it sort of instilled sort of a sense of civic responsibility that you have to do more, that it's not just, you know, attending school and then just, you know, that those things turn into abstract things. You have to continue on. And recently I found out that people that I used to tutor when I was at Puente are now going to Brown and Harvard, and that felt pretty nice. So it's sort of continuing the network, also the support of the private-public partnerships. That really helps out, and it's something that needs to continue if our community needs to go on. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So often, the issue is trying to get the word out, both in terms of where to turn for resources, as well as these kinds of stories, to have everyone have the evidence that we see here in this room. I'd like to introduce Ivelisse Estrada, Vice President for Univision, to tell us a little bit about the commitment Univision has made to play a role in getting the good word out.
Muy buenos días a todos. On behalf of Univision, I would like to thank you for the opportunity of joining you today. I'm extremely excited because for the last 3 years we've been working on a multi-year, multifaceted education campaign that we are about to launch on August 26th. I'm not going to be too many details so that I don't school my own people. But we were, about 3 years ago, we started, as you know, let me backtrack, you know that Univision, since its creation, has been very concerned with our community. And we have been trying to assist them in improving their lives. Every year, we work on informational campaigns on issues affecting our communities, such as citizenship, immigration, voter registration, the census every 10 years, health issues. But 2 years ago, we decided to go a step further and prepare or try to work out a multi-year, multifaceted education campaign in response to the high dropout rate among Latino youth. We work with a national group of educators that help us frame the messages that education is important and to provide the information to the parents that they need to navigate the educational system. Sometimes, as you know, these systems are so complicated and the language is a problem, so we decided to provide out those tools. Here comes. To provide the parents with the information they need to help the students achieve their educational goals. And talking about financial aid, one of the things that we really want to work is to help promote all those wonderful scholarships that are out there, because sometimes the parents just don't know. Help the parents understand what courses their children must take at a certain amount, in a certain level. Algebra by the 8th grade, reading by the 4th grade, etc. Because sometimes, we talk about our parents, but sometimes they just don't know. They have no idea what is it that they need to know to help their students achieve their educational goals. We partner with the U.S. Department of Education, and we're working with them to provide our viewers with information and materials on education through the toll-free number. So I am excited about being here today, and I look forward to working with all of you in your local markets through our local affiliates to promote your programs that can be a great resource for our families. Muchas gracias.
The issue of communication and making sure that we get the word out is also part of our follow-up. Univision has a very bold approach to it, and we are delighted to have this as a mechanism for delivering this message in Spanish. We are also very eager to deliver the word in English and to be as creative as we can in making sure that the practical information that our families and our young people will use well to pursue their dreams is what we want to bring to this effort. I hope all of you have had a few minutes to look at your materials, that you've seen this very first, and I say first because it really is a first preliminary version of a directory of what works for Latino youth. I really would hope that all of you look at it, but really immediately think about all the things we've missed, all the programs we need to add. This is for us a beginning, and our commitment in terms of the follow-up is equal to all the energy that has gone into today. For us, the issue is exactly what's been said in this course of this meeting: going to scale and providing information so that immediately you can follow up with each other and network, that in the long range that we can think about growing these programs strong. And for those of us in the White House Initiative and in cooperation with our President's Advisory Commission, to look at the year 2000 and to see that as an opportunity for us to have a national meeting on Latino educational excellence. Our ability to contribute to this community, the community of America, is what we're talking about. Our zeal to be here as full participants and to show the ability that we have and the joy that we have in being in this country. I hope that you'll keep your eye on us. I know that we'll keep each other honest and committed and focused. It has been a pleasure for this discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Sarita. I want to ask the Congresswoman if she would like to make some closing comments.
Once again, I would like to thank you for convening this. I think this has been a very important first step in bringing people together and getting the message out of how critical it is for public-private sector to work together towards this common goal of providing opportunity for Latino children. And I want to thank the speakers and Sarita Brown for all their efforts in making this event so successful. And I certainly look forward to working with you, with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, to take the next critical step. This is only the beginning, and we still have a lot of work ahead of us. And I look forward with my colleagues in the caucus to working with you to make sure that we are successful in the mission that has been presented to us today.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank the Congresswoman and her colleagues from the Hispanic Caucus. Each of them is devoted to pursuing the goals of this convening, and as Lucille said when she introduced each of them earlier, they have specific responsibilities in addition to their overall commitment, and we look forward to working even more closely with them, and we know that they will be enlisting the help of their colleagues from both sides of the aisle on behalf of the initiatives that we know would make a difference in the lives of Latino children. I want to also emphasize that if you haven't ever seen, please get a copy of. If it's in your materials, please take it and pass it around. The Hispanic American Education Report, which has a lot of good information and facts in it. And then, as Sarita says, this pamphlet that we put together, What Works for Latino Youth. Because this convening is truly only a beginning. We've done a lot of work the last 6.5 years to follow up on the points that were made both by our panelists and by our speakers in the audience. We wish that we could even go longer today, but we only had 2 hours of satellite time in which to communicate out to the entire country. So what we're hoping is that each of us here will take it upon ourselves to continue this convening at the community level, to take back what you've heard here, the information that we've been sharing together, to take back the examples of what works, and then to report back to us, to let Sarita and my office know what you're finding, what you think needs to be done, what kinds of coalitions we can help to build on behalf of the goals that we hold for the future of all of our children. This kind of convening takes a lot of work, and there are many people who have really worked very hard to make it happen. And I'm grateful to all of them, people on the White House staff, the agency staffs, the congressional staffs, everyone who's been involved. But I hope that each of us is even more encouraged now to do what we can in our own ways, to take what we've heard today and then to really build on it, and to make this a central point as we move toward the new century, which happens not very long from now, to make everybody in our country understand how interconnected we are, what a great strength our diversity is for our future, and how it all comes down to whether or not we will give our children the tools they need to lead successful lives in this new century. I'm very optimistic because of all of you in this room and the many others like you around the country listening to this, but I'm also very determined that we must do everything we can to make our rhetoric and our actions actually coincide, and to enlist the support we need to make the difference in our children's lives. Thank you all very, very much for being here.